thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. So excited to have you here to talk about all things race weekend and just your life in general. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So let's jump right into kind of how just you, like I know we've talked in the past and I've learned a little about you from our past talks, but tell our audience kind of just about you, where you're from and what you do. Oh no.
Absolutely. So I grew up here in Vancouver to Jamaican and English parents. And when I was 19, I moved out to England, where I lived for about 15 years. So I moved out there for work. I was involved in the finance trading industry, but that's also where I really developed my love for Formula One, when you're so close to it and everybody around you loves it so much. But then I moved back to Vancouver about 10, 15 years ago, and got out of the world of trading and finance and got involved in the magazine business. Initially, actually, with a magazine, I got a lifestyle magazine revolving around the trading community. But then I made the switch about 7 years ago and started Race Weekend, which is obviously, deeply into Formula One.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those are two very different things to switch from. So interested on kind of getting deeper into how that happened. Were you more looking to leave what you were doing full time? Was it just one of those things where you're like, maybe I wasn't meant to do this my whole life, and that's kind of what got you started into motorsport?
Yeah, definitely. So, the world of trading is all about, risk and reward. And myself and a couple of other guys, we were quite young at the time, and we started up a company. And the company went really well, and we were in a position to sell the company. And so I just kind of thought that's a pretty good way to exit that business on a high, because I had seen too many people exit it not on their own terms. And I'd been obsessed with magazines and the media business actually since I was a kid. I used to buy every single BMX magazine and fantasize about what it would be like to live in Southern California. So when I knew that we were going to sell our business, I started coming up with ideas for a magazine, so the trading magazine. In fact, after work, I had hired a tutor from the London College of Printing to teach me about the magazine business and how they get put together, so that when I exited my company, I was in a position to just sort of transition over and start that business. But in terms of Formula One, that interest, I didn't think I'd ever do anything related to Formula One. My mom and my brother watched it when I was a kid, so I was very exposed to it. And at the time of Jacques Villeneuve, sort of Canadian, winning the championship and stuff, but it sort of was over my head. But when you're in that world of trading and, people making money and buying fancy cars in London, you sort of gravitate towards the world of Formula One. And so I left trading, got into magazines, developing an interest for Formula One. And then I just sort of realized that once you understand the magazine business or the media business, I realized, well, hang on a second, there's a huge void from a fan's perspective in terms of the media being offered in Formula One. And then as somebody that was on the business side, I thought, my goodness, this is probably the best possible audience that you could create a product for. So then that's when I decided to make that switch.
But before we get too far into the magazines, I definitely want to talk about the new magazine that you and your team have started. But I wanted to know kind of what you mentioned, like your mom and your brother watched Formula One, but you kind of weren't very into it at the time. What really attracted you to Formula One? What was it for you where you had that moment of, I love this?
Well, so it's a great question. So I remember a couple of things. So one was my mom and my brother, that the Jacques Villeneuve championship season, I just didn't understand how excited they were getting in front of the TV. Like it was on a whole other level to anything I'd ever seen. So that was always in my mind, that there was something out there that could make my mom go that crazy. And then when I was in London, there's two things. One was I had the opportunity to visit two Formula One factories. So I was invited up to the BAR Honda facility, and that absolutely blew my mind. Just to see, it looked like a trading floor, like where we worked, in the financial world, just rows and rows and rows of people in front of computers. And then understanding that these were all people with PhDs in engineering and mathematics, and they're like, that's what went into making a car, and seeing all the fabrication. So you can't see all that and not be blown away. And then I had an invitation to the McLaren Technology Center as well, and then I was sold. But to be honest, and then with some friends, we went to Monza, just as a like, let's go do something fun. And then you hear the cars and everything, and then that gets you more involved. But to be honest with you, I remember reading in the British press about Lewis Hamilton before he made his debut, and reading that he was a half Caribbean, half English young guy. And that's my background. And I was like, well, hang on, I'm going to pay attention to this. Let's see what happens. And then every single race since his debut, I've never missed one, and I think it was a combination of those things that just kind of blew me away.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear, like, some people have like that one moment where it just clicked, and some people it's more of like a compilation of moments and memories that bring them to the sport, which I love. And that's an amazing story. Also, how you just saw a similarity between you and Lewis Hamilton, and like seeing somebody in the sport that you felt really represented you is such a cool story. And I mean, I think Lewis specifically has been such a great person to pave the way for other people of different backgrounds and color. And it's amazing to hear that you also resonated with that. So that's really awesome.
Totally. And that's why I think that all this discussion around, whether it's people of color, whether it's women entering Formula One, or just that are in Formula One and just getting more visibility, I just think it's what, it's just a natural human instinct. It's what connects you when you know that personal story. And again, I give a lot of credit to Netflix for drawing out personal stories, and hopefully those personal stories in subsequent seasons will go in different directions, because they're getting a little bit one-dimensional. But I think that when you when you see different ways to enter a sport, when you see different connections, I love the racing, but I also love the culture and the locations, and then everybody can identify with something different and love it for a different reason. It's such a rich sport that way.
Yeah, it's so true. And speaking of that, I feel like that's a perfect way to segue into your magazine and the project now, Race Weekend. I showed my husband Matt immediately when I got the magazine. Yeah, so you sent us this edition, which Matt's referring to the history behind the US racing and stuff like that. But just talk to us about the idea of the magazine, how it came to be, and like how this thing became real.
Absolutely. So as I said, we had Rev Journal, which focused on the individual locations, but during the lockdown, we were just hit with a completely different inspiration. And it was really two things. One was obviously the Netflix series and seeing how people were reacting to it. But then we've always been sort of fascinated by the fact that, it's great that Formula One travels around the world, but it also makes it kind of hard for people to come and watch it in person. And so it's a bizarre sport in that 95+% of fans won't go to a race, during a season. But during the lockdown, it was 100% of fans weren't able to go to a race. And for some reason, that just sort of made us think, well, hang on a second. Now having a physical, tangible product is more significant, than ever. And so that's when we decided to change the format. So as you know, it's a supersized, extra large magazine. It's huge. We have access to incredible photography. So part of it was we wanted people to feel like, there you go. We wanted people to feel like, that they were touching something with the race, that we were sort of letting them interact with the sport in a different way. And then we decided, rather than go and focus on one location each time, that we would choose a different theme. So there's Jet Set Formula One, which is, looking at every single location that hosts an F1 race. F1 in the 1970s, which is probably the coolest looking decade. And also so many developments happened that set up modern F1. F1 in the USA, which you have. And then the next one that we're about to go to print with is Formula One World Champions, where we look at the dominant drivers in each regulatory era, right? Which is kind of a cool way to look at it. And then also, just as we said, like the circuits, the cities, and the culture. So, how could we bring all those together into a package and and send them to people at home and kind of try and build up a bit of a community around it at the same time.
Yeah. Speaking of community, this project started from a Kickstarter, right? That's amazing.
Well, absolutely. So when we decided to change direction and rebrand to Race Weekend, and we all talk about the Race Weekend, but when you really think about it, the Race Weekend is where all these things come together, right? You travel, you watch the race, you're going out, you're enjoying the local culture, the local flavor, and you're interacting with other fans. So we thought the name sort of brought together everything that makes Formula One great. And because we were so sort of excited about the community side of it, we thought, well, what better way to get everybody together than to, put this out on Kickstarter? And then we got a phenomenal reaction to it. And that, I got to tell you, the 30 days of Kickstarter was one of the best business experiences I've had in my life. Like you're so focused on one particular task and you're just interacting with people. And it's a really efficient process. And the people that came to us via Kickstarter, we still have like an extra special relationship with them now. And people reach out to us all the time. They feel invested in it, which is such a great place to be.
I love that. With the magazine, you mentioned like getting personal is usually a way that really brings people into sports, or people who might not thought, oh, racing, I'm not really into racing, but then they hear a background story about a driver, and that's what brings them in. Do you think with the magazine, that's kind of what you're trying to do with this F1, is kind of peel back the curtain and help people learn more about the sport and its history and drivers?
Absolutely. So social media is amazing for sort of that immediate connection. And, I can show you a little bit myself about my own life. A magazine is a phenomenal medium for going deeper, right? For going deeper into a particular topic. And the way that we've structured our magazine, both sort of physically and in internal layout, is that we go deeper in two ways. One is with the imagery and again, having a large magazine allows you to really immerse yourself in it and the archives that we have access to, but also by taking a theme and drilling down really, really deep. Like if you want, you can just pick up the magazine anywhere, open up a spread and say, oh, that looks really great. Mm-hmm. Or you can take a few hours and read the story and like learn the full history of the 11 venues that have hosted Formula One in the United States. And you're going to actually get something really deep out of it. So and that's why I say like Netflix has been fantastic for introducing it to people. There's so many great content creators across social media that bring you into what's happening right now with it on a pretty much real-time basis. And I think our function is to do some storytelling on a bit of a deeper level, but again, recognizing that people love Instagram is a wonderful, easy medium. So we try and make our magazine easy, but at the same time, there's a lot of depth to it. So yeah, absolutely. It gives a chance for people to go deeper into the culture of Formula One.
Yeah, it really, I know you're calling it a magazine and that's what it's kind of categorized under, but it really feels like a book, for lack of a
and
better.
Each page is a work of art in and of itself. That's what's incredible. And you're telling story, some pages it's just this beautiful picture that you found, deep in the archives of F1 pictures, and that looks beautiful. But then other times you have pictures just overlaid with, kind of the text of this is the background on Coda, or whatever it is, and I love that. It's so visually appealing as well as informational.
I love hearing that. And it's a funny when you mention about calling it a magazine. Technically it's a magazine, but it doesn't follow the form of other magazines. So sometimes I feel like we're selling ourselves short. But if we call it a book, people form another opinion of what a book is. So a lot of people have been calling it a coffee table magazine, which until we find something different, I think that's a fairly good summary of it. And from a design perspective, I have a partner. My partner's name is Tom Brown, and he's just an absolute genius when it comes to design. Plus, he is an absolutely nuts Formula One fan with a deep historical knowledge in his mind. So, we have a very small team of people that put the magazine together. and Tom handles all creative direction, which makes it look fantastic. You know, I should say as well, just talking about our team, it's a small team that comes together for each magazine, and it's mostly women. I should point out as well that most of our subscribers now, which I really noticed since December, I don't know, it's really stuck out to me in the month of December, but at least half of our subscribers are women, and also most of the content partners that we have are women as well. And I love it. You know, when it comes to our team, we were just looking for the best people to put out a magazine, and they happen to be women. So that just sort of happened naturally. But I think, again, one of the great things about this new era of Formula One since Netflix and since it's blown up in the United States is that there's a lot of the really great fresh content that's coming out is coming from, you know, women that are doing it on different platforms. And I don't know, it's just breathing so much life into F1, and it's really making it a fun environment, and it's much more of a collaborative environment than there was a couple of years ago, because it was, you know, from a business perspective, being an entrepreneur, you know, having something consumer facing in Formula One is a rough go. But I feel like now it's a lot more collaborative, and it's, you know, even if we don't get all the support that we wish we got from certain teams or F1 itself, at least at the grassroots level, it's become just so much more of a collaborative and fun place to operate.
Oh, music to my ears. Music to my ears.
Good.
I think that's what's interesting too about Matt and I. Like, yes, we're married, we're husband and wife, but also we're like male female. So like we have conversations like that all the time about what it means to be a male in F1, what it means to be a female in the F1 space. And we were just debating it earlier today, actually.
Right. And I find that discussion super interesting. And, you know, I don't want to make generalizations, but luckily I have so many, you know, women that I can speak to about it that are deeply into F1. I actually have to tell you this, like, that blew my mind. The other on the weekend, I went to my niece's birthday, and I have three nieces, and they're all now obsessed with Formula One. And one of them came and showed me some paintings that she'd done with for Lewis Hamilton. And she did this other one, which blew me away, which was the initials of every driver on the grid. And she included Hulkenberg because he was the replacement for Vettel that one race. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, nobody wanted to talk to me about Formula One 3 years ago, and now my nieces are all over it. So it's terrific.
One thing that I noticed, and actually Brianna and I were discussing this earlier, was I think back in the day, especially, you know, when you go through your magazine of, you know, the history of the United races in the United States, when women were involved, they were mostly kind of the grid girls. You know, they were kind of there. Yeah, I hate to say it, but they were, you know, there as attractive women who, you know, that was kind of their goal. And now we're in an era where, like you're saying, there are women just interested in F1 because they like F1, and it's like the switch where it was almost, you know, that had that dated kind of view of women before, and now we're kind of switching to this more modern, you know, like you said, women are now just involved in it because they like it. They find it interesting.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think it goes even deeper than that. You know, as I mentioned, the person that introduced me to Formula One was my mother. And that was back in the 80s, right? So women have been fans of Formula One probably since the first Formula One race, right. You know? And I think, yeah, I remember when we started, I'd read a statistic that even back then, 30% of Formula One fans were women. But so you know, how do I put this? I think the issue was with the media that surrounded Formula One and the sponsors that surrounded Formula One not acknowledging that and respecting that. Certainly, you know, I'm guessing that the growth of women fans is accelerated from Netflix, but the growth of all fans that has accelerated since Netflix. But I think now there's just such a healthier discussion around it, that the sport and the teams are acknowledging it more. But I think most importantly, there's more opportunities that women are creating for themselves to create content and comment on the sport however they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And be involved within Formula One as an engineer, as, you know, I mean, obviously we have W Series now, like there's
totally,
it's very, encouraging to see where things are heading. Like you said, there probably was lots of women fans before, but the way the media portrayed women in the sport was more so, unfortunately, as eye candy and not as true fans who care about the sport and are genuinely interested in, the engineering and the racing and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a whole conversation around stereotypes and like
Yeah.
these walls that are there, but have been there. And I think women now are feeling more empowered and comfortable to come out and say, like, no, I like Formula One and I actually am very knowledgeable on it. Or even comfortable with coming out and say, hey, I like Formula One because I think this guy is good looking. And that's okay too. That's amazing.
There's nothing wrong with any of
Right.
that. Exactly.
Right.
Just to jump back for one quick second, we're talking about women in Formula One and grid girls and everything. So in that US edition, I believe we have 2 photographs of grid girls.
Yes.
And just so you know that went through a rigorous internal debate with because I wasn't going to sign off on that, but all the women on the team felt that it was what we're trying to do is it's a time capsule, and we're trying to tell a story of what happened at races at a particular time, and those were some of the dominant images that were popping up in the archives that we saw, and everybody felt like, hey, you know what, we're not campaigning for grid girls to be on the grid in 2022. What we're doing is just saying, hey, we're talking about this race at this time, and here's what we saw. And I think that is interesting for people to see, especially people that are new to the sport. People could have come to the sport recently and never known anything about grid girls. So again, they can look at the magazine and it can spark an interesting discussion.
It's funny that you mentioned that because we honestly had a conversation about those exact photos. Like,
what was your discussion around it? I'm curious.
So I'm torn. Like, as a designer and a creative, I love it. I think
aesthetically, it's a beautiful picture. It is,
and it's part of history, like you said. Like, that is the common imagery. Even those old books that I have from 91 and 92 have images almost just like that in there. But on the other hand, as a female in the sport, I'm like, okay, that's like the stereotype I'm trying to break.
But and not just that, Brianna, but we did talk about how it was tough to actually find pictures of women that weren't like that in that era. And I think that was the more upsetting part, was that, like, okay, so pretty much from 1970 to more recently, the only women that you're really seeing in a lot of pictures are the grid girls. And it's like, that might have been, and again, that kind of feeds into how the media really kind of zooms in on a small portion of the female fans. But I think that kind of was the I don't want to say like an annoyance, but that's kind of, it was upsetting that's the reality. It's like those were the only women you really saw in the media then.
Yeah. Basically, used as sex symbols instead of like looked at as, like we said, fans or contributing members of a team. So I don't know, but I love the pictures. I really do.
But again, if you look at the issue as a time capsule or telling a particular story, again, there's a lot of discussion right now about women in Formula One, but even seeing that as a reference point can let you know how things have changed or what it was like then, and it's part of the discussion, right? And so, we had a big internal debate about it, and I was, I go on the side of caution sometimes, but everybody on the team said, no, I think that is part of the story that we're telling.
Exactly.
That's what we're not commenting, we're telling a story.
Right. Yeah. I think that's such a great way to look at it. It's just telling the truth of how things were, right? You're not condoning, you're not saying, it's basically, look, this was the reality then.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But showing how far women have come. Like, look, that was like the only capacity women were involved.
Exactly.
And now we've got engineers on the pit wall who are responsible for a championship winning team right now.
And there's been women as team principals, and there's women throughout F1. Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Recently with Drive to Survive coming out, the F1 has kind of seen this huge increase in the North American crowd. So I'm curious if these two kind of worlds collided. You decided to jump into this right when that peak was starting to come up.
I wish my timing was more revolved around Drive to Survive, because I actually started making business plans about getting into the F1 space in about 2011.
Mhm.
And then we launched our first publication in 2015. So I tend to look at the years prior to Netflix in sort of dog's years, because it was
Right.
a heck of a lot more difficult. But looking back, I mean, we were, the thesis that I had, that my partner and I had at the time was, you know, you can't have this be the most popular sport in the world and not in the United States, which is the country most obsessed with fast cars and all of that. So at some
Right.
point, much like soccer, we use soccer as our basis. Like, people never thought soccer would become popular in the US, and it's, you know, look how that's developed. So I think we were great to get in early, because we developed a lot of relationships, and there were sort of cracks, and there weren't a lot of other people trying to get in the way that we were. But honestly, it's night and day since the Netflix show came out, in terms of the, you know, it's not just the North American reaction, but just the reaction of the stakeholders within F1. I used to travel to races around the world, and people would ask where I was coming from, and I'd say Canada, North America, and they'd look at me like, why deal with you? And now all of a sudden, it's such a strategic advantage to be from here and to fundamentally understand North American sports, North American fandom, this growing F1 community firsthand. So yeah, I sometimes wish I hadn't had to put up with the beating that we took pre-Netflix, but you know, maybe we wouldn't be in this position if we hadn't done that.
I was going to say, you had better insight than Netflix did, right? I mean, you were a little bit early, but truly, they probably had the same viewpoint as you. Like, why is this not catching on in the States, and kind of having that same approach of, you know, make it personable, and kind of diving into the world of it. And now look at it, like you said, it's just like soccer, it's grown exponentially.
Well, it has, and again, Netflix did something which was genius in terms of coming at it from the personalities and the lifestyle and the behind the scenes. So when we entered F1 back in 2015, we knew up front that there was a lot of restrictions in terms of, you know, content and you know, photographs and video and all this kind of stuff. And so we had a bit of a challenge, like, how are we going to create something about Formula One and not just do what everybody else was doing? So that was our opening, which was the culture and the lifestyle of Formula One. And so our initial publication, which was called Rev Journal, each one focused on, it was more like looked more like a newspaper, but each one was focused on the location that was hosting the race. So we did one in Melbourne, one in Barcelona, one in Sochi. We did a bunch, and we would print in that location and distribute in that location. And that sort of established this niche that we have of what we call city circuits and culture, which then when Netflix came out and introduced people to the sport, not purely from the racing, but from the culture and the lifestyle side, then all of a sudden it was such an easy next step for people to look at what we're doing with our magazines. So in that sense, we were, you know, we were lucky. We were very thankful for Netflix and how they approached it, because that's the audience that we're really attracting here.
Yeah, that's really true and amazing. It kind of is, like Matt said, funny how you guys are kind of a step ahead of Netflix in a way, thinking about this niche and how it could be filled. And definitely when Netflix came along, like you said, I'm sure it helped out in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's, your magazine is doing a great job of kind of like appealing to that wide variety of audience. I feel like there's a little bit of everything in here for every type of fan, which I love. I mean, if you're a history buff, learning nerd, there's tons of great information in there. But if you're an artsy person who just really loves Formula One in general, or a certain driver, the photos and the design speak so strongly to that. So I think you guys have done a great job. I think my question for you is, where do you see the future of Race Weekend going?
That's a great question. So I want to, there's just 2 or 3 things that I want to do. So I want to keep putting out new collections of the magazines. I like offering it up in a set of 4. I think that's a good way to introduce it to people, and also it just works with the direct to consumer business model, you know, and I think the experience. There's a few things that we're going to play with in terms of the packaging of that for the next one, but the core of what we do will stay the same. The other thing that I want to do is bring our unique point of view and our storytelling to different formats. So, you know, whether that video, social, and even podcasts, you know, I just haven't seen, or I haven't figured out a way for us to bring exactly, you know, the point of view and the high level of output of the magazine into those environments. I think we figured it out now. So we're working on that. But if it's not as unique as what we do in the magazine, then we just won't do it. So that's something that we're aiming to do next. Also, we've had a lot of people ask us for different forms of merchandise. You know, a lot of people want, you know, the spreads or the photographs or the art that we commission for the magazines. They want to purchase that. So we're gonna start making a curated selection of that available. You know, and I think a lot of people identify with, you know, what we're doing at Race Weekend and want to know when, you know, we've experimented with some shirts and stuff like that, but I don't want to do a shirt just to say Race Weekend and be a shirt. You know what I mean? Again, it has to feel like we're executing it with a purpose at the same level of what we're doing with the magazine. So more collections, taking our point of view onto different platforms, and then, you know, the art, design, merchandise extensions.
I was just gonna say, if you have a T-shirt, let me know, because I love the logo.
Yeah, well, like I said, it translates well, and when we've experimented with it in very simple ways, we've received an amazing reaction. But
Yes.
We just want to make sure that we're contributing something special.
Yeah. No, I hear you on that. Coming from the creative side, it's like, okay, we want to have purpose and meaning behind this and not just slap a logo on a T-shirt and call it a day. So
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, what was your favorite part of the magazine? I'll go into mine, but what was your favorite part?
It's just kind of really interesting how you kind of just expand the history of the US and kind of those ties. And I think there's a lot of American fans out there that are kind of looking for that. These newer fans that may not know the history, but they're willing to learn it. Like they're falling in love with the sport, with the guys. And, you know, Brianna and I talk about it a lot on the podcast, but, you know, there's some hopeful American drivers that, you know, might be able to make their way to F1. And I think that'll only help the sport in this country to, you know, and of course you guys already have two. So we're lagging behind. We're newer F1 fans. So I had no idea that there was a street circuit in Phoenix. And that's I've been to Phoenix. It's one of my favorite towns. I had no idea that they even held races there, but I also love the section on COTA just because as an American, I'm partial to COTA. It's, you know, I think it's one of the best tracks on the entire circuit.
I think what I love most about the magazine is, like, when you think magazine, you think like your typical magazines that come top of mind, like People Magazine, Time Magazine, stuff like that, where you have to, there's tons of stuff in it that are kind of run the gamut. There's ads, there's all this stuff you have to get through. And if you're buying that magazine for like the other day, I just went and looked at the Vanity Fair magazine that Lewis Hamilton's on the cover of. And I had to like dig through the magazine to find that stuff. What I love about this is I don't have to do any digging. It is so visually beautiful, and you have no ads in here.
No, and that's actually, I should have mentioned that right from the beginning. Exactly. We have no ads for a couple of reasons, but we took the direct to consumer approach. So we're not on any newsstands. You know, we connect with people online. We use Shopify. We send it out to people. And we decided not to put any ads inside the magazine because, look, I can't look at an advertiser and say, spend a couple grand with us rather than on Google ads. I mean, I buy Google ads. I know how good they are. So we decided, look, let's make a different business model. Let's follow the direct to consumer model. And because we're setting out to make as beautiful a magazine as we can, let's not junk it up with any ads whatsoever. And let's also not have to fall into the normal structure of little bits at the beginning and then slightly bigger bits and then little bits of, you know, forget that. We have a different thing that flows a lot better, I feel, in the magazine format. And people have really responded to it, you know? And again, I made a promise that we will never, ever put ads inside the magazine. We may put something on the back cover, because we'd love to have a big sponsor that can help us do a lot of different cool things. But never inside the magazine will we interrupt it with junky ads.
Magnus, I have one last question, and I'm curious. It might be a tough question to answer. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I'm sure you've done a ton of research in the past, 7 years since you've been doing this. Is there anything in your, in-depth research that you've kind of come across that really sticks out about history of F1 or events in F1 that, you kind of didn't know before, but just doing that research, kind of building this thing, it just blew your mind?
Well, I'll be totally honest with you. I had this conversation just yesterday with Elizabeth Blackstock, who's the writer of the main features about the upcoming issue. I just said, look, don't ever let anybody know how much I learn when we put these issues together, because I mean, so for this upcoming issue, we start with 1950. We start with 1950 and all of the engine regulations. I think there's been about a dozen different engine regulations, and the level and depth of her research and knowledge is incredible. And so, yeah, I'm learning stuff all the time. I'll be very honest. Yeah, but I don't know if I can point to any single moment, but I guess that's what makes this fun and what helps it connect with people is that I've been around Formula One for a long time, but where everybody, especially in social media, is focusing on what happens right now, and then it's over, and then they focus tomorrow on what's happening in that moment. Right. By us being a group that looks backwards a little bit in terms of diving into the history and the culture of the sport, I'm not sitting here saying I know everything. I'm keen to learn as well, right? So, and hopefully that comes out in the product that we put out there, where we try and curate something at a really high level, but we also we know what other people want to know too, because we're going through it in a similar way.
Yeah, I think it's always like I've been told this by multiple people in the industry, like if you're not learning anymore, it's not worth it. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's also just speaks to you guys on your team as fans.
Well, and one thing I was going to say is I think as you and I have gotten into the sport, Brianna, we and you had said, like, once you stop learning, you it's not worth it anymore. But we're constantly trying to find F1 documentaries just to learn more about, Senna or Fernando, or kind of, that's one thing that I think, we've gotten bitten by a bug, but we're not just kind of in it for the now. We are like, and I think a lot of fans are kind of like that. A lot of the newer fans that are coming around, and that's where your magazine can be huge for people who, they've scanned all of Netflix, they've watched all the documentaries, and it's like, what else can I read? And like that information can just be huge to people who are really just wanting to learn more about the history and culture.
Well, and on that point, a lot of the books that exist out there about the history of Formula One are so dry and are very difficult to enter. And I'd like to think that because of the visual approach that we take, that we can tell a very deep story in a way that's just very easy to take on. It's not an encyclopedia, which some of those books can be, and really tough, that we can entertain you at the same time as educating you on a particular topic of F1.
It's a perfect segue. I really quickly want to touch on this because I think it's something you guys are doing that I haven't seen anybody. I mean, the magazine is something I haven't seen anybody do before, the way you do it, but this specifically, the race weekend guide books you sent me, which I love. This one's specifically for Austin, and it really goes in depth, not in just to the race circuit, but just like the city you're in. Can you just speak a little bit to these and your idea behind them?
Absolutely. So, there's 23 different locations that are going to host a Formula One race, right? Now, why those cities? You know what I mean? Like, is there a historical reason? Is there something particular about that location? So we want to examine it from that perspective. The other thing is, if you're going to experience a race weekend, you're there for 72 hours at least. And there's only a handful of hours of actual racing, and that you'll be at the circuit. And so it's such an unbelievable opportunity to explore a different culture, in a different country, in a different location. When I was early into this business, I remember speaking to one of the people at the team at Yas Marina in Abu Dhabi, and they explained to me that a fan will likely, if they go to a race, and most won't, but they'll go to one race, and chances are they'll have to get on an airplane. So, do you get on an airplane and go to Monza? Or do you get on an airplane and go to Abu Dhabi? Or do you get on an airplane and go to Montreal, right? And so there's so many different factors as to why you'd go to one over another. And that's what our whole jet set issue is about. So we took that, and we love the opportunity to drill down like we did for the Austin guide that you have. And then we had a phenomenal opportunity to be commissioned by the Miami Grand Prix to do the guide. And that was phenomenal because, again, that was a real collaboration with the circuit. And, we just had tremendous access all around the city. And it's that merging of, Formula One, but also the location, and where do the two kind of come together, right? There's some stuff that's pure racing, stuff that's pure lifestyle, but there's also that overlap. And I just find it fascinating how that is seen, or how that works out in different Formula One host cities.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I loved that, like, you even give like places to go. Like, this is about a place you can go line dancing, like in Texas. Like, that's so fun. And a different way to look at your F1 experience. I know for us, Matt and I, our first F1 experience was a little different, just because in Quebec, like, they have their own little F1 island where you can't really leave. It's hard. It's hard,
Yeah.
difficult to go, but I wish I would have known more about the place I was in. So in those downtimes, I could have gone and done something like that. So I think, again, you guys are servicing like a niche that is much needed.
Well, I love that you say that, and I hear that a lot, right? And I think that I know that so many fans wish that they were better prepared before they go to a race. And
Yes.
you can get certain standardized information, but that only goes so far, and that's why I think it's great when, Circuit of the Americas, wishes to work with us, or Miami wishes to work with us. I just wish that we could do it with more of the circuits. I wish we could do it with all of the circuits.
Yeah.
But maybe that's another growth area that we can push into.
Yeah. F1, do these for all the tracks that people want them.
It's obvious.
And it's funny because we're two very different people. I'm on the creative side of things, and he's like a scientist, for lack of a better word.
Oh, great.
So like, he's information based and I'm like visual based. So
okay, but this is what pleases me so much, is that the two of you can come at it from a different point of view, but both love the magazine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I think what you're doing is so brilliant, is that you have the, I'm the kind of guy who likes to read the in-depth, encyclopedia type stuff.
Yep.
And you have these very good pieces about the history, but then I also can appreciate going through the pages, and I'm like, wow, this is a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
To be able to have the two things in one, like you said, it's not true. It's not a magazine. It's better. I don't know what it is, but it's better.
I love it. Love it so much. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, do you want to ask the first question on that list you have upstairs?
Sure. I suspect I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. So who is your current favorite driver right now?
Oh, I'm the worst at this question. This is so lame, but I don't have a favorite driver.
Is that right?
No, I try so hard to have a favorite driver, but I don't. I cheer for like weird things happening in the midfield, like Yuki Tsunoda achieving beyond what you thought he was going to do in a particular race, or Pierre Gasly. The last driver. Well, obviously, early on, I had obviously I was cheering for Lewis, but then he made the sport boring by dominating for too long, so I got mad at him. But like when Kobayashi was around, something about him, I cheered for him every weekend. But no, sorry, lame answer. No single favorite.
Interesting.
No, that's totally okay. I I have a favorite driver for many different reasons, but I also I feel like I have a little love for every single one of them. So,
Right.
it's hard to like pick just one favorite.
Yeah, I think also Formula One is one of those sports where if you only like one driver and you want the driver to win, like you're not going to enjoy the sport. So like
Right.
I
Yeah.
just develop this
Right.
appreciation for weird things happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Next question is, what is your favorite like Formula One moment for you? It could be something like personal or it could be like a race moment.
When a driver unexpectedly wins his first race,
Mhm.
I get emotional. I don't care who the driver is. When it was Vettel back at Sauber, when it was
Right.
Gasly getting lucky, it doesn't matter. A first victory is there's it's particularly if they're not on the dominant team, right? But if
Yep.
if like a crazy victory, a first victory is everything to me in this sport.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
wish you could see behind me right now. I have a beautiful canvas of Checo Perez when he won his first race with Racing Point, and he was standing on the podium crying. It got me
I was
too.
crying.
Oh my gosh, it was such a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I'm with you.
it is. Those moments get you unexpectedly. That's when you know you're really in deep in this sport. When
Yeah.
something happens like that and you start to cry and you're like, why am I so emotional?
Exactly. I get those.
Okay. If you had a Formula One team, if you were an owner, what would
Oh,
you call it? What would the name be for your
That's a
team?
good one.
I know what I would do. And it would be branding it properly with a cool set of sponsors and having legit fan activities in every single race city, and more importantly, cities that don't host a race. And I think it would be the easiest way to be successful and have a wonderful business, even if I was doing terrible on the circuit.
Oh my
So
God.
that much I know, and I fantasize about that a lot, but I haven't gotten quite so far as to figure out the name of the team. I'd probably just sell that to the highest bidder to fund my
There you go.
F1 needs to hire you as creative director or something, or director of, because that's
Let
all
me run a
music to
team.
my ears as well.
Let me run a team.
Matt, do you have a
Yeah,
crazy question in mind?
I guess. Well, I think this is a good way to kind of sum everything up. Where do you see, or where do you want to see F1 going in the future?
I want F1 to legitimately be a fan first sport. Okay. I've been able to see F1 from the inside for a lot of years. And even in this Netflix era, it's very much a B2B sport, right? I, like the two of you, grew up on North American sports that put the fan at the center of the business model and everything that they do. That is not the case in Formula One. And I think it suffers as a result. Fortunately, there's people like yourselves and me and all these other content creators and people making merch that are trying to make up for it. But I just hope it becomes a legit fan first sport, because it's quite honestly still far away from being that. And when it gets there, I mean, we've
It'll
seen,
take over. Yeah.
oh, it'll be unbelievable. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the
It's a great
hard
answer.
truth, but great answer. And hope Formula One listens to you and all of the fans. I feel like we're all speaking with one voice in what we want.
Yes,
And
we are
yeah, and I hope this magazine helps do that.
trying.
And thank you just so much to your team. I know you mentioned you guys have a small team behind the scenes, but seriously, you guys like listen to the fans and what they want, and we're like, you know what? We're going to do this for the fans. And for yourselves too. I mean, it's something you love and enjoy, and you can tell and feel that the whole team loves and enjoys what they do by the product you put out. So just big thank you to you and your entire team for doing this for the F1 community.
Well, listen, I so appreciate hearing that, and thanks to you both for the opportunity to talk about it and answer some great questions about it, and sort of just share what we're doing with other people, because that's probably the biggest challenge in Formula One, because it's not a fan first sport. It's hard to spread the word sometimes. So this really helps.
Yes, absolutely. And where can people find you, like website, social media?
So, like I said, we're not available on the newsstand. So our website, The Race Weekend. So obviously we spell it funny, RACEWKND. So theraceweknd.com is where everybody signs up, and then we will get the magazines out to you very quickly, especially if you're in the US. They come, I think, within 2 days. And then we're on Instagram at The Race Weekend, and trying to have some fun there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much. Everyone, go check them out. Go sign up for a subscription for the magazine. It is 100% worth it. And it's something you're going to keep probably for your whole lifetime. So I encourage everyone to go check them out. But thank you so much again for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yes,
Awesome.
thank you,
Thanks so
Agnes.
much.